Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners for the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course, and in this video we're going to be closing out Lab 1.3.3. Our Python programming review. And we're going to be closing it out by covering the following things. And this is what you're going to learn about in this video, is how can we read and write to files like text files that might be on our Linux operating system. How can we use the strip method in order to remove new line characters? And I'm going to walk you through step by step all of the code that you need in order to complete the challenge activity on Part 7, step number 4. So we're going to do all of this from our DEVASC virtual machine. Now, again, you don't have to have the virtual machine in order to complete this. However, this activity would require that you have the file devices.txt with this content or similar content in order to receive similar results. Now, again, you don't have to have all of these devices in your devices.txt file if you're doing this on your host operating system. This is provided to you in the lab, and I'll get to it in just a second on the VM. However, let's go ahead and talk about how we would manipulate files. So the first thing that they have us do is they want us to create a program called file-access.py. Now, you can do this in VS Code. However, I'm going to do my example here in VI, or the Vim editor, VI improved. So where are we at right now in the file system? Well, I'm in home DEVASC. Now, the devices.txt file is not in home DEVASC. So I'm going to have to cd into the labs directory, and then the devnet source directory, and then the Python directory. And this is where we have the activity files that we are going to need. Again, I've staged these files already. Now, it's always a good idea to make a copy of the original devices.txt file. And so I changed the name here. I just said orig device.txt. And I'm keeping this in the event that maybe something goes wrong and I destroy or do something I don't want to do to the devices.txt file. So how would we create that copy? Well, it's easy. I would simply say copy devices.txt to orig.devices.txt. And so now I have two backup copies of the devices.txt file. So always a good idea. So let's go ahead and let's open up the file-access.py script that we have created here. Now, you'll notice I've got some stuff commented out because I'm going to be showing you sort of the lab version of how you would open and read from a file. And this is sort of the old school method where you're using the file.close approach. And I'm going to show you how to do it using the with open. And that's sort of the new way to do. I shouldn't say it's not very new, but it's certainly the more Pythonic way to approach it. And it's a little bit easier to use because we don't have to remember our file.close. It's going to auto-magically do that for us. So what do we have up here? So let's take a look at our first line. We're going to open that file, right? We're going to open devices.txt, and here is the Python code to open a file for reading. Now, the lab is very clear. There's three things we could do here. We could read, we could append, which would be the A, and we're going to use that here in the second lab, the challenge lab, or we could do a write. Now, if we use the W, it's going to overwrite that file if it exists and there's something in there. So just like the greater than symbol when we're doing redirection, if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it and put the contents in there. Or if it does exist and we use the W here to write to the file, it's going to overwrite the contents of that file. So we've got file, and this could be any sort of variable name that we wanted to use. I could say my file, devices file. However, a popular Python convention is to simply say file as our variable name, and we're assigning to it the open text file, devices.txt, for reading, because we're going to read what's in that file. Now, once the file is open, we've got a for loop here. And again, much of this code is provided in the lab. Again, I try to add some value by showing you some different things we might do, but this is pretty much provided to you with the exception of that line and this line right here, which we're going to get to in subsequent examples. So for, and again, item is just a variable name, just a placeholder for us. So for each of the items in that file, and what we mean by each of the items is each of the lines in that file, we're going to simply print whatever that line is. And then when we're done iterating through the file, just like we could iterate through a list, when we're done iterating through the file, we close the file down. Now, if you forget this, it's not the end of the world. However, this is considered good practice because you want to make sure that you don't leave it open in memory somewhere. So we close that file down. And again, when we use the sort of new school approach, the more Pythonic approach with the with open as file, we can go ahead and forget the file.close method because it's automagically happening for us. All right, so let's run this and let's see what's going to happen here. So in order to run this, I simply say Python 3 file-access.py, and there we go. And it does exactly what it shows you in the lab. It's going to print out each of the lines, in other words, each of the devices that are in the devices.txt file. However, you know, it's not very clean here, right? Because what are we getting? We're getting the new line character. So in that devices.txt file, if I was to cat it out, you can see that everything is on a line by itself, and there are no extra lines that are in between each of these devices in the devices.txt file. However, what we don't see and what's implied here at the end of each of these lines in the devices.txt file is there is a carriage return, a new line character. Again, that we don't see, but it's there, and we know it's there because you would have had to have hit return to get to the next line to enter in the next device. So this is one of the little quirks with Python where if we don't want those new lines, right? If we don't want the carriage returns here between each of these, we need to strip those off of each line. Well, how do we do that? Well, let's go back into the file-access.py, and the line of code that we would need to add is that line right there, where basically what we're saying is for each of the lines in that file, devices.txt, I'm going to take the item and I'm going to assign to it the item, right, which is the line, but I'm stripping the new line character out. And so all we're doing is we're taking the line, stripping the new line character off, and that is being dumped into the variable item. And then we're going to print it out, and now it's not going to have that new line character. So let's go ahead and rerun that. And as you can see, now we get the output contents of the file without the carriage return or the new line character placing a blank line after every single device. And that's really what we want, right? Because now it looks like the file. So the next thing that it's asking us to do is it's asking us to create an empty list, and we're going to append the devices into that empty list. Now, remember, let me go ahead and pull this up here. Well, oops, sorry. We'll say vi file file-access.py. We're going to have to create the list up here, right? And this is something that you typically see done at the start of a file so that we don't forget it later on. So we're going to instantiate or create an empty list. We're going to open this file for reading. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to leave the strip in there. Now, I don't have to print out each item that's being added to the list. But we're going to modify that, and I'm going to go ahead and append each item. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to change the print statement to say, now adding the following device to the list. Right? And so what that's going to do, and we can actually get rid of that extra space, we're going to use the comma here because we're not concatenating anything. So the print statement now has a little bit more functionality. It's actually going to print out for me the device being added to the file. And then ultimately we want to print this list out. So here's what we'll do is after we do the file.close, we'll go ahead and do a print statement. And I'm going to say, here is the entire list. So above, and it's called devices. So above in this print line here, as we iterate through each of the items or lines in the devices.txt file, what's happening is I'm printing out saying, hey, you just added this line. You just added this, or you just added this device. You just added this device. However, once we get done, I want to print the entire list out in toto, right? Or everything that is in that list. And so we capture that here by not just printing the individual item, but printing the list itself. So let's run this and see what we get. All right, so we'll save our file here. Let's clear the screen to give us a little bit more room with which to operate. And there we go. Now adding the following device to the list. So it tells us which devices are being added. And then here is the entire list. Now we could have put a new line right in here. And so that it would have said, here's the entire list. And maybe the list is on a line by itself. But again, whatever you're looking to produce, right? You can go ahead and make some additions there, subtractions. If we were to go ahead and VI that file and come down here, maybe we don't want it to tell us each of the devices because ultimately at the end of the program running, we're going to see that entire list. So we could do something like this. Here is the entire list, and now we receive everything. All right. So again, there's multiple ways to achieve success here and to solve the challenge. All right. And speaking of challenges, we now move on to the challenge where they're not giving us any code. Now, keep in mind, all the code required we've already seen in steps 2 through 6. Now we're on step 7. And so we're going to have to figure out what are the lines of code that we need. We want to open a new file and save it with a different name, file-access.input.py. We're going to use the append mode. Now, here's something that's interesting. Before we move on from this file here, and this definitely deserves some coverage, this is sort of the new way to do it, right? Is to use the with open. Now, you'll notice that I don't have the comma with the string R. I don't actually need that up here either, right? And why do you think we might not need that comma with the R up there? Exactly. Similar to some Cisco things, Python has some defaults as well. And when you open a file, by default, the file is being opened to read. In other words, we don't need to put that R in there if we're opening the file to be read. And let me go ahead and prove that it still actually works. We'll clear the screen and let's rerun the program. And there you go. It's still opened the file for reading. So the R is not mandatory. It might make it a little bit easier to read, but if you know Python and you're using the file open command, chances are you would know that the default is to read, and so that we don't need to put that R in there. So let's take a look at the, excuse me, let's take a look at the challenge activity here, and you can see that the file -access-input.py, and I've put some comments up here, right? Maybe you want to start commenting your programs. I'm going to put the author name, I'm going to put the date, the purpose, to prompt the users for device names, and to add those devices to the file devices.txt. Now, I've got some bells and whistles in here as well. I'm going to create this new list right here called new devices, because we're going to keep track of the new devices that get entered in, and we're going to print that out to the user at the end. And we're going to show them, hey, here's a list of the devices that you just added in. So this line of code right here is our while true, because remember, we want the program to run until the user types in exit. Now, I could have checked for exit all lowercase. I could have checked for exit maybe with a capital E, but the program just simply said, if the user types in exit, we want to print out a message that says, hey, all done, and they're done. And that's our if. So if they type exit in, we're going to say all done, and we're breaking out. That's it. The program is over with, because all the program consists of here is our infinite while loop until the user types in exit. Else, in other words, I'm basically saying here, so if they don't type exit in, well, then this is what we're going to do down here. Now, I could have done this without the else, but I'm going to leave the else in here. And here we do the new school way. Now, I have to have the A in here, because if I don't put anything in there, the default is read. That's not what we want. We want to append to the end of the file, excuse me, using the write method, right? So we say file.write, and we've opened this file devices.txt as file, right? Remember, that's a variable name. I could use my file, devices file, some cool file. I could use any valid variable name here, right? But the standard convention is with Python that you just simply say as file. Or you sometimes will see the lowercase f all by itself. So with open as f, I typically put file. So we say file dot, and we're going to write to the file the new item. And you'll notice here, right, the new item is whatever the user was prompted to put in. Whatever the user input was, that's the new item that's going to get dropped in there. Now, we're going to add the new line character, right? We stripped it out before. Now we need to add it in so that each item that the user enters in is placed on its own line by itself. And you can see I'm also appending that item to that new devices list so that I can print that list out and see what were the items that were added, and maybe I want to do a quick double check. So this is going to meet all of the requirements. It opens the new file with that. We open a new file with that name, file-access-input.py. We're using the open function, but we're using it as with open instead of the file open, with mode A, so that we can append to the devices.txt file. We've got the while loop that's going to run forever, prompting the user for devices names until the user says exit, and each of those devices names is being captured in a variable new item as they get entered in. And then using the file.write, we're writing the new items or the new devices into the file, and then we're going to close it out. And again, that's auto magic when we use with open. So let's run this and let's see what ends up happening here. So I'm going to go ahead and say clear, and we're going to come back here and we're going to change this to Python 3. All right, so my device name, I'm going to use some of the older ISR G2s. So let's say, we'll keep the capitals there, we'll say Cisco 1941 router. And then we'll say Cisco 2911 router. And then we'll say Cisco 3945E router. All right, so I'm done at this point. Maybe I've caught up with my inventory, and who knows, maybe in there you want to put the serial number or something like that, because this file is going to persist. As long as we leave it here on the virtual machine, the file will be there with these additions to it. Now that I'm done, I'm going to say exit. And so there we go. We get the all done message right there, along with a message that states, hey, the following devices were added to the file: Cisco 1941, Cisco 2911, and 3945E. Now, you could just look right up here, but why not? Let's do some extra functionality here. Let's spice things up a little bit. And now the big test, did it actually add those three devices to the end, or did it append those three devices to the end of the devices.txt file? And there you go. There they are. Well, what if we run this again? And let's go, we'll do some even older. We'll do some ISR G1 devices. So the device name, I'll say Cisco 1841 router. Cisco 2811 router. And I have some of these in my basement that I actually do some labbing stuff on. How about a Cisco 38, and I'm trying to remember if there was a 45. I believe there was. Cisco 3845, and then I'm all done. So again, it tells us, hey, here's a list of the devices that you just added to the end of that file or appended to the end of that file. Let's cat the devices.txt file out. And there it is, proving that we are appending to the end of the file. Again, if I had a W in there, every time we ran this program, it would overwrite everything in the devices.txt file with just what we had entered in. So again, the three modes are read, the default, write, which will create the file if it doesn't exist and put whatever you wanted in there, or it will overwrite the contents of the file if it already existed and put what you wanted to put in there. And then append, which is simply going to do what we saw here. So let's take one more look at our file-access-input.py script, complete with comments. And this will do everything you need in order to complete lab 1.3.3 step number, or I should say part 7, which is what we were working on here, which is how to access and manipulate files that might be on the file system. All right, well, that is going to do it for lab 1.3.3. And that was part 7, and you've got the challenge activity. And so now you're going to be successful, maybe change some of the things in that challenge activity, and post up here as a comment the code that you ended up with as your final solution, right? So that we can share your solutions with other learners that might be looking for some ideas on this lab. All right, as always, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.